It's Rant Delicious. Welcome to the SEO Rant. I am your host, Morty Overstein. You might know me better as Wix's head of SEO brand, but I'll remind you this podcast is pure unofficial Morty Magic and Morty Mania. Where can you find official Morty Magic? Man, the Mania side, check out Wix's Serps Up podcast at wix.com/SEO/learn. It's my podcast. I'll pitch whatever I want. Where can you find the SEO Rant? You found it, Mazel Tov. You can also find it wherever you consume a podcast. Don't know where to consume a podcast? Google, where do I consume a podcast? You can also look for it at the SEORant.com, on Twitter, which I refuse to call X, at SEO Rant. When does the SEO Rant come out? Typically Thursdays and or Fridays, so it actually does make sense to subscribe so you're automatically notified. For today's listening pleasure, we have an award-winning chief product officer, a frequent speaker, podcast guest who talks about product strategy and leadership. She's won a Webby Award. She's an executive judge. She's a mentor, a startup advisor, and currently a fractional CPO and product strategy consultant. Please welcome Lisa Schneider. How are you?
Hey, Morty. I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
I never won an actual award. I mean, I've won a participation trophy before. Like, what's that like?
Yeah, super fun. We actually won 8 Webby Awards when I was at Merriam-Webster, which was great. And actually, not everybody who wins a Webby Award gets to go on stage to collect it and give their 6-word speech.
Oh.
And I pitched to be able to do that. I said we would be the oldest brand ever to be on the Webby Awards. I told them I would bring props. So I brought a little like hand-sized dictionary to wave around. And so I am recorded, and you can find it on YouTube giving my 6-word speech, which is holding up a dictionary and saying, "This is your secret weapon."
That's so cool. That's amazing. I see.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for. I won. That's not true, by the way. I won a podcast award, but I didn't really win it. Aaron Sparks and the Edge of the Web guys won it. And because I do the podcast with them, I got one.
Then
too.
you won it. You won it too. You won it too.
The funny thing about that, though, is they shipped it from Indianapolis to Israel, and they wrote down the value of the thing. And, like,
it was in customs for 6 months. Yeah.
It cost me like 500 shekel to like receive the stupid award. I wanted to send it back.
I have most of them are in the office. I'm not at Merriam-Webster anymore, but I have one on my bookshelf here in my office.
It's like an Emmy.
Yeah.
Like an Emmy.
That's right. It is. It's the Oscars of the internet.
Oscars of the internet. I like that. Okay, so now I have to earn some money. So I'm going to do a cold read. Yeah. So I'm just going to be straight up about this. I'm selling something right now. Today's episode is brought to you by SEMrush. SEMrush is a leading online visibility management and SaaS software. Like, you didn't know that already. If you didn't know that and you listen to this podcast, you have serious problems. Anyway, they enable you and your business to grow globally and run search engine optimization, pay-per-click, content, social media, and competitive research campaigns, and get measurable results from online marketing. SEMrush offers insights and solutions for companies to build, manage, and measure campaigns across various marketing channels. If you're listening to like, oh, I had to listen to a cold read, I have a cold. So boo-hoo, cry me a freaking river. It's hard to read a cold read with a cold. I'm the one who should be complaining. Sorry about that.
Like a lesson in language. How many senses of cold can we use in one sentence?
Oh, Lord, please. The only thing would be like we had like alliteration to follow all of the words cold many times.
That's right. That's right.
So,
that'll be our next exercise next time.
Please not. So today we're talking about women in tech.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand this off to you. Where do you want to start with this topic? Because we can talk about a lot of things. I mean, go to a lot of dangerous directions, or we can crap all over the internet about this.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'll say is, right, many things can exist and be true at the same time. And so there's no doubt that being a woman in tech has been hard, continues to be hard, and sadly will likely continue to be hard for at least a little while. And it also can be true that you can meet great people, right? Great men, and have, wonderful working experiences. And so, it's not necessarily true that because I'm here to talk about women in tech and maybe some of the things that are difficult and what we can do about that, doesn't mean that every working experience I've had has been bad. And but I think it's really critical to understand what goes wrong, right? What goes wrong? What are we doing wrong, and how can we fix it so that we can fix it? And if you're not doing anything wrong, are you also doing nothing? Right. So if you're a woman in an okay situation, are you doing nothing? If you're a man and you think you're an ally and you're doing pretty well, but are you seeing that elsewhere? Are you speaking up? So this is not about, hey, everybody's bad, right? This is all bad. But I think, a really great example is just on LinkedIn the other day, someone in the AI space a man talked about how important it is to have women's voices in AI and how difficult it is for women in emerging technologies like AI. And so therefore he wanted to recognize and flag women that work in AI. He included my name on that list. And somebody in the comments said, like, who's holding a gun to your head, stopping you from working in AI? And I'm like, dude, reply guy every time.
There's
It's
always
just a matter of
someone.
how long. There's
There's
always someone,
always that person.
right? And it's like, first of all, if you've said that, you probably are, perpetuating it. But let's just say that you're not and you really don't get it. Like, listen up, right? Just listen to people. So I think that context is really important as we get started.
Do you find that it's changed or the environment has changed? Because I remember when I first got into tech, it's almost like 10 years ago. This wasn't a conversation people were having at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's great, and I've said this, and I've said this to women, I've said this to younger women that I mentor. What's great is that it's a conversation. So for sure, early in my career, it wasn't talked about. And what ends up happening for women, because it's not talked about, and because of the ways that we're socialized, is you think this is just happening to me, right? Oh, they're interrupting me. They're restating my ideas later and getting credit, right? I'm the only woman in this room. And so you feel a little bit alone and you don't know what to do about it. And you think that maybe, what am I doing wrong that people are interrupting me? And with these conversations being open, and right, by the way, those are some of the least of the things that happen. But those are really pervasive, often, even if you're in a good environment. And what the conversation has done is enable women to understand, oh, it's not just me, right? And enable men to understand, even if I'm not doing this, right? How can I help? Or if I'm doing this on accident. So I've had two colleagues, male colleagues, that did a bit of that interrupting me or restating my idea. And I was like, like I like them. They seem like really good guys. Maybe they're not doing this on purpose. And so one on one, this happened to be in the same company, but like one on one at different times, I said to them, hey, do you realize that you're doing this? Right? Because like we have a good working relationship and I don't think you mean to do it, right? I think it's habitual. And both of them essentially stopped. Like I'm not saying it never ever happened, but and I would have never known to do that. I would have never thought to do that. So certainly, one message, right, to the women listening is, speak up, right? If you think somebody is doing something unintentionally, let them know. Ask for allies, right? Ask for other women in meetings to say, "Oh, hey, I'm glad you recapped Lisa's idea and really, and really liked it." But just the ability to speak up and speak about these things has for sure made a big difference, even if we're not yet where we want to be.
So my next question is the flip side of that. Do you think that the
Mhm.
conversation has been a cop out? Meaning there are times where people are like, well, we're having all these conversations. There's been progress. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to be active about this. I don't need to pay attention to it, yada, 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 because look, things are just getting better.
Yeah, of course. Of course, which is why that guy shows up in the reply saying, like, who's holding a gun to your head and stopping you, right? Who's stopping you? Well, it's really, I think, if you've had probably at least 10 years in your career or more, you've had hopefully, good experiences, but you may have had bad experiences and understand how draining it is. If you are in any kind of toxic environment, if instead of the hard thing being the work, that's like the hard fun thing, right? Like, what patterns do I see in this data? How do I solve this problem? What's changing on the landscape? How do I get ahead of it, right? Like, that's hard. It could take a long time, but it's interesting and fun. And a lot of us get into this kind of work because, we like unraveling problems and like breaking it apart and Tetrising it back together. And so that can be like good stress. But the bad stress is when, it's uncomfortable to go to work, when you're always fighting for your space, if you're being mistreated. And again, these are the least of the things, right? Then there's like the sexual harassment and that sort of thing. And so talking about it, if it doesn't change it, right? It's great that we're talking about it. So I feel a little better. I can, vent out loud. But if I'm still going to work every day and experiencing this, I'm going to drop out. Right. And if there's still sort of bias built into the systems, I'm going to drop out. And one reason AI is a great example is, somebody just did this again. And by the way, I gave a talk in January on AI with examples that like went back to the summer. Now we're coming up, to almost in April. And somebody went in and said, hey, show me a doctor, show me a lawyer, show me a tech executive, show me a consultant. Not only were they all like, 34-year-old white, they were like the same guy. They literally were the same guy in different poses with the chiseled jaw, right? And some different clothes and different poses. And the board executive, like his hair was a little gray, and again, it's like that bias in, bias out. But if that's the environment that you're in, and I think it was also about a year ago that there was, on LinkedIn, every woman was sharing. I put in a picture, of myself, and I think we're not sharing video, but like I'm sitting here in a black turtleneck, like I'm completely covered, and I would put in a picture of myself like this, and it would come out with this like unzipped, busty, hypersexualized, view. And so if that's the view of the men that you're working with, and that's, sort of like their perception and what they're building, and you're in that environment constantly fighting, it's hard. So yeah, talking about it is not enough. And a phrase that a lot of women executives and I use is like, stop trying to change the women. So, there's waves of this. The first wave was, oh, we recognize this. Here's all the things you can do, young lady, right? To change how you behave, to change how you lead in order to fit this paradigm. And I think hopefully the next wave is, how do we change the circumstances? How do we change our organizations? How do we change leadership so that the women do not have to constantly be pretzeling themselves just because they're not exactly like men?
It's funny you mention leadership, because one of the things that I saw more recently, or at least recently in recording this, was Larry Page from Google was doing, I don't know if you saw this, he was doing a speech or Q&A session with some Google engineers about SGE after the whole, not SGE, I'm sorry, about AI output, after the whole controversy around what AI was outputting in images.
Yes.
And some dude, I'll call him like one of the tech bros, asked him a question, and he's wearing a shirt. I don't know how to describe this without like being offensive. He's basically wearing a shirt that presents him it sexualizes and trivializes women, and it's like that's the first thing you notice when you look at him. It's like that blatant. And Larry's like, yeah, let me answer your question for you. Like if that was me in a meeting, like, get the hell out of my, like, what are you doing? Get out of here.
Right. Do not dress like that. That is inappropriate.
It's insane. Like, Anna's like, I wouldn't walk down I wouldn't anywhere, anything, ever, let alone like I'm meeting Larry Page and I'm at work with other people and other women.
Right.
And he said,
right. And I'm being
nothing.
videoed for so this is the thing, right? Saying nothing, right? We say nothing. And this goes to another sort of platform I have, is this idea of kind versus nice. Right. So we're all sort of raised to be nice. And then some people are just not nice. But like nice means like maybe you're quiet, you're accommodating, you make people feel good, so you don't say anything. But kind is you speak up. Right. Sit down. I don't want that shirt on my video. Would have been a really kind thing to say.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, is that I think a lot of leadership is completely disconnected from any of this stuff.
Well, right. A lot of male leadership. Right.
True.
A lot of male leadership is completely disconnected because, look, they've not experienced, and I will say, like, I'm married for like 20 years now. And, my husband's a real sort of like guy's guy, grew up in like a sort of guy's world, was a tank commander in the army. Right. And so when we first got married, it like did not occur to him. And obviously he's married to a technology executive. So like, he's great, you know, like we're equal partners, it's all good. But like it did not occur to him at the beginning. Like he would give me advice about work and he would say, well, just go say this. And I'm like, honey, like you are a tank commander. You can get away with saying almost anything you want. So like I'm a 5'4" woman and I cannot. And like that's just a fact. Right. And I can do it. And so I think, you know, some of the other thing is like, what does that advice look like? Right. So if you're clueless, right, whether you're a leader or whether you're a peer, he's not clueless anymore, my husband. The advice that you give may not work. And it's everything that we read, right? Like, okay, you know, women have lower salaries because they don't negotiate enough. Well, guess what? Women who negotiate actually get penalized, right? It's not seemly for a woman to want money. So, how do you, you know, we're constantly dancing on the edge of the knife, right? How do I negotiate for what I'm worth and get paid the same as a man in the same job? Without being perceived a certain way because I could disagree with this, but it's going to happen to me. Right. So how do I do that? So I think thinking about you know, what is the advice we're giving women? If you're clueless and you're going to say something like, well, just negotiate your offer, like just negotiate, right? Doesn't work. Just tell somebody, you know, not to do it doesn't work, which goes back to that comment before of like, stop trying to fix the women and start trying to fix the environments.
How do you do that? Because I feel like it's a very tall task in the sense that a lot of these things are so uncommon. Your husband, he didn't mean to do it.
Mhm.
It's so my wife's called me out a gazillion times.
Right.
It's so innate or unconscious or latent that you don't even realize what's happening. You don't even realize that if you think you're doing something helpful and you're being an absolute jackass and you just had no idea.
Yeah. So I think, you know, your leadership point is really good because you sort of automatically, right? Oh, leadership doesn't get it. I'm like, well, male leadership, right? Leadership and male leadership are not, or
I
certainly
totally blew
should
that.
not be synonymous. And there is so much evidence about the benefits of women leaders, right? You know, specifically, women leaders have such a great track record, uh, but they don't get the opportunities. So, you know, women leaders tend to have less of that sort of risk-seeking behavior. So they make kind of more stable and longer bets. So their outcomes are better. They tend to lead in a way that leads to better pay parity. They tend to have higher retention, right? Because they're leading a way that's not just empathetic, but like inclusive. So one of my other platforms that I talk about is cross-functional collaboration. Right. And how I got embedded with the SEO community as a product person is taking this idea of, you know, SEO being critical as part of a core product function, part of our core strategy, and including that in those builds from the get-go. So if you sort of take that up to the next level, right? How are we including all of the voices? How are we making sure that we hear about, you know, problems or potential roadblocks or red flags or anything early on? People feel included and respected. You know, women understand, you know, this pressure to juggle. So maybe like it's okay if you leave at 5 o'clock, go pick up your kids, and then go back and work from, you know, 8:30 to 10:30 instead of, you know, waiting to leave until 7 o'clock. Like I've put in the same hours, but I'm flexing my time. Believe me, I'm sticking around for that job, right? So you have better retention, you have higher quality people. But again, right, all of that data doesn't seem to matter, and we default to the default male in leadership.
It's interesting, like all of those qualities. When I used to be a teacher in Baltimore City, it's a long time ago. I'm not going to say how long because I'm going to make myself feel old. But for whatever reason, there's a greater propensity of women to be teachers than men. There's very, very few, at least in the inner city, very few male teachers. And they always like say, like, yeah, we want a good, strong male presence. There's very few male teachers, yada, 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 yada. But I will tell you something, for the very reason I think you're saying, the women teachers were infinitely better than the men teachers. They were far more patient in how they approached the kids, how they developed trust, and how they developed a rapport with the kids. When things went bad, they were able to understand like a much longer term vision of how to fix this. Whereas the guy teachers were very, myself included, like knee jerk, like, oh, person's being problematic, out of the classroom kind of thing. And it's just so funny that we see, like, it's almost as if society says, like, women in certain places, like as a teacher, you're great. You should be there. You're wonderful there. We recognize you as being in some ways way better than men, but in other areas not. And I don't think that's
Yeah,
necessarily totally switched yet.
and guess what happens with pay? right? So teachers are critical, right? They're right. And to your point, right? Let's say I'm a behavior problem in class because I have, something going on at home, or I'm getting bullied or whatever. How a teacher handles that can shape me for life. Teachers get paid crap,
Yeah,
right?
no
I'm a
doubt.
technology executive. I get paid okay. Teachers get
My,
paid crap.
my wife's a nurse, and she's like, you get paid so much more than I do. Why?
Right, right. Why?
I'm like, I don't know. You should get paid more than me. I don't do anything. We're talking about SEO.
I help things get found on the internet.
Yeah, like whatever. Like no one's gonna live or die if like this keyword doesn't rank.
That's right. She's actually titrating the cancer medication. Right.
But that is like society is just completely screwed up.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't have any hope for that. So okay, I guess one last question to sort of wrap this up that I'm wondering about. You mentioned, let's go all the way back to that LinkedIn comment. First off, did you answer them out of curiosity?
I wrote something like the comment I made to you, which was like, oh yeah, like reply guy every time. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
You have to choose your battles, right? Like it's that whole engaging with trolls thing, right? Who am I going to answer? Who really wants to learn? He was clearly doubling down throughout the thread. He was not going to listen to me. I'm not like screaming at a stranger on LinkedIn. He was not going to listen to me. But
You only
again,
scream at strangers on Twitter. On
oh,
LinkedIn, we get
there's
delay.
a place for screaming at strangers,
Yeah,
Morty.
it's Twitter.
Right, exactly. And but that's also sort of understanding, right? Like and this is not place and time as in sit down, be quiet, wait your turn, but it is place and time as in where will it be effective? So, there's a quote that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had said that, when she got married, her mother-in-law gave her advice, which was along the lines of like, sometimes in a marriage, it's good to be a little deaf. And what she meant was, you don't have to hear and react to everything that bugs you. And so, think about like, where is it going to be effective? Where do I speak up? If something's really egregious, you should absolutely speak up in the minute, right? If you're going to embarrass people in public, maybe you wait and say it quietly, privately, if it's not egregious, right? If you're not demonstrating that, hey, we allow these things, right? So the t-shirt example is maybe egregious, right? Somebody cracks a really inappropriate, offensive joke, right? At a certain group in a meeting, that's egregious. You say, hey, we're not doing that here. But otherwise, like where do you go one-on-one? Where do you talk to leadership? How do we as an industry advocate for more women in leadership? How do we as an industry speak up? Because like not only did Larry Page say, like, dude, your shirt, sit down, like clearly no one else said anything to him. He was
Right.
not made uncomfortable.
No, he felt very comfortable doing
Right.
exactly what he did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which basically kind of rolls into my last question is, how much of are you worried, or how much do you think of the support is, okay, I'm behind this. This is important versus I can't not be behind this. I look at almost like web accessibility. No one's going to say like, oh, I don't care about accessibility. Of course I care about accessibility, but you actually do nothing about accessibility. Like, come on. How much of it is that versus, no, this is really important and we should do something about it? And it must be difficult to gauge that and uncomfortable almost.
It's difficult to gauge from the outside, is what I'll say. And yeah, there is plenty of that, right? And we hear about it all the time. We hear about guys that, right, go on LinkedIn and Twitter and say all the right things and then go to an event and misbehave, right? And the things you hear coming out of events from women are just drastic.
I have a policy at events. Basically, I do not go to any of the parties or anything. I like if there's like a speakers mixer and I'm speaking, like I'll go to that for a little bit. But
Yeah.
like these are just places for people who are drunk to go and do ridiculous things.
Yeah. Again, as a very tiny little woman, I also am, quite careful about, right, and again, about like where I can go. And that's terrible, right? If I'm I'm not walking down like an alleyway somewhere at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like here I'm at an industry mixer with my peers. And to your point, right, I still sort of have to worry about like, oh, where do I want to be? And so I think but to your question, many of these people might have said the right things in public, but they're not acting on it. And the other thing I'll tell you as a woman is there are plenty of guys who are not making this a platform. They just are doing the right thing. Like I worked for a really early stage startup, right? As a fractional CPO. And it was two guys from Texas that founded this thing, really needed a product person, brought me in, had an amazing learning mindset, wanted to hear what I had to say, were totally respectful. After 5 months, they said, wow, your contributions are amazing. We're going to make you a co-founder. They just were respectful and inclusive. I was a peer. They named me I didn't ask, right? They said, there's only 3 of us and like you're in it and you're doing it. Neither of them are out in public talking about how well they treat women. They just did it.
Right. It's like Shakespeare, thou dost protest too much.
That's right. 100%.
That's like the only line from Shakespeare that I know, basically.
Okay, I'll feed you some others.
I'm not a Shakespeare person. I like poetry, but Shakespeare's not my thing. Anyway, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, best place to find me is actually on LinkedIn. I'm Lisa Schneider on LinkedIn. And that's where I talk about this and all kinds of other things around, product and technology and AI leadership, cross-functional communication, and happy to see folks there.
Awesome. I have a link to the profile in the show notes. To the audience, where can you find the SEO Rant? You found it, you completed an episode, but in case you want to listen again, you're sitting in your friend's car. Where do I find this thing? Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud. We have a great, mediocre, and terrible podcast. We're also there. Keep an eye out each and every week, Thursdays or Fridays. So again, subscribe. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
My pleasure. And to the audience,